Hey, hello everybody, and welcome to Ruben's History Show. Today I'm going to make a new topic or a new show called The History of Ancient Egypt, which was one of the three ancient civilizations after the ancient Greece and Rome. And I also made episodes on the history of ancient Greece and ancient Rome and history of the Soviet Union on my YouTube channel. And now I'm going to talk about the history of ancient Egypt, where I will talk about the history of ancient Egypt, which lasted for 3,000 years from 1050 BC all the way to 30 BC when Cleopatra committed suicide and when Egypt came under Roman rule. It came under a Roman province after the death of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. So the ancient Egyptian civilization began in 3100 BC when the political unification of Upper and Lower Egypt took place under Narmer's rule. Narmer was the first pharaoh of ancient Egypt from 3150 BC all the way to 1100 BC. So he basically was the pharaoh of ancient Egypt for just 50 years, from 3150 BC all the way to 3100 BC. So, and then Egypt was divided into two regions known as the Up and Lower Egypt. The Lower Egypt was where the Nile River started. The Nile River was going to it started from the south. No, it started from the north all the way to the south. It started from the south all the way to the north. And the Nile River is one of the biggest rivers today. It rivals the Amazon River, which is in the South America. It's one of the largest rivers in the world, the Nile River. And if anyone remembers the famous story of the book of Exodus, that was the book of Moses, who was the leader of the Israel or Hebrew people, and he led them out of Egypt. And he was also put in the basket because his mother feared that the Egyptians would kill him, and so his mother saved his life by putting him in the basket, and it went through the Nile, and then the basket went to the Pharaoh's palace, and then the Pharaoh adopted Moses as his son during that time. And then in 3150 BC, Narmer conquered the north of Egypt, which just became ancient Egypt at the time, and it became a one nation after Narmer conquered the north of Egypt, or which was Upper Egypt at the time. And that brought an end to the prehistoric period of Egypt, and that began the ancient Egyptian civilization at the time. And Narmer's plate was the first historical document which tells the story of the unification of Egypt. So the unification of Egypt was kind of like the American Independence of Declaration. That was basically the Egyptian version of the American independence of declarations of independence. So the Narmer's plate is 22 inches and 24 inches wide. That's how it looks like, the Narmer's plate. That's how many inches the Narmer plate is. And then the Nile River is a river in the northeastern Africa, and is one of the longest rivers in Africa at the time. And then between July and October of each year, the Nile River would flood. It would flood. And also the Nile River was the place where people would go to wash their clothes, because at the time they didn't have any washing machines so they could clean their clothes like we do today. It was a different time. We're talking about like 1,000 years ago, or more than 1,000 years. because they used the water. They put their clothes in the water so they could clean their clothes. And so they did at the time. And they cleaned their clothes by putting their clothes in the water, in the river. And they cleaned their clothes. And they would leave their clothes out to dry outside of their houses until it became dry. And throughout the 3,000 years of 3,000 years of history of the ancient Egypt was also under foreign rule from 900, I believe it was from 900s BC all the way to 130 to 30 BC when Cleopatra committed suicide, or it was probably between the time when Alexander, or the time uh, when Egypt was established under Greek control, when Egypt became under Greek rule, or also known as the Ptolemaic Egypt, which was established in 350 BC under Ptolemy the First Soter, who was one of the generals of Alexander the Great, who was a famous Macedonian king who destroyed the Persian Empire. And then the Narmer's plate was discovered by James L. Quabbel in 1897 all the way to 1898 at the Nekka, which is a town in Egypt. And he discovered it there. It was 1,000 years after it was buried somewhere. And then the plate shows Narmer wearing the crown of Upper Egypt on the other side of the plate, and the crown of Lower Egypt on the other side of the plate. So that's what it showed on the plate of Narmer, which was the first historical document ever in the history. And Egypt had mayors in each city in ancient Egypt, also known as nomarchs, who were the mayors of the cities, who were put in charge of the administration of the city. And that was also a position of a province governor. It was a province governor in the city who was in charge of the city at the time. And Egypt was divided into 40 provinces, which were called nomas. That was the provinces of ancient Egypt at the time. So there were 42 provinces in ancient Egypt at the time. And then Egypt also created the world's first language, which was Egyptian. The reason why they created the Egyptian language was because the people in the population of ancient Egypt was literate, because they couldn't speak or read any language, and they didn't speak or read any language. And so under Narmer's rule, the Egyptians created the first language, the first world's ever language, the Egyptian language. And people started reading Egyptian, and they started speaking Egyptian after the Egyptians created the world's first language during Narmer's rule. The Pharaoh was the ruler of ancient Egypt. It wasn't like the prime minister or president of the nation. It was just a ruler, which means he had control of the nation. So basically, the Pharaoh also had power over the Egyptian military, and he had power over the people of Egypt, because he had the power, he had the authority at the time. And when the Pharaoh died, he believed that he would die and go into the afterlife, because not just the Pharaoh, the Egyptian people believed that whenever they died, they believed they would go into the afterlife, because they believed they were gods. So basically, that's why they were thinking that way. That's why they believed that when they died, they would go in the afterlife, because they were basically gods. That's what the ancient Egyptian people said or thought at the time. So, and then in Egypt we had multiple gods. We had over thousand. We had in the ancient Egypt there was over 1,000 gods and goddesses. One of the gods, for example, like Ra, who was the sun god. Ra was the sun god of ancient Egypt, or in the ancient Egyptian religion, and he made the sun rise from the ground. He made the sun rise whenever it was night. He would make the sun rise. It would go on top in the sky, and then there was also another god. I'm trying to remember his name. Osiris, who was the god of the afterlife. Yeah, Osiris was the god of the afterlife, and there were this other god's name, Adonis Horus, who was the son of Ra. Ra was the sun god of ancient Egypt, and there were many other gods. Trying to remember the other gods' names. Like, Adonis was one of the gods of ancient Egypt. Osiris, Isis was a goddess. Isis was a goddess of ancient Egypt. And he was the sister of Osiris, who was the Egyptian god at the time. And then also also in ancient Egypt there was the Sphinx, which were basically a half lion and half man, a half person. And so those were one of the statues in ancient Egypt at the time. And then also and then in Egypt there were jobs you could take. There were jobs you could take. You could go to the military, you could serve in the administration of a city, or you could work in the agriculture. So those were the jobs in ancient Egypt you get to go to if you wanted to take those jobs, basically. And then some kids in ancient Egypt, they couldn't get a job, so they had to start one at an early age. At the time, they had to, find a job that they really wanted to, and they decided to take some jobs in the military and in the agriculture, where they growed crops in Egypt at the time. And then, at the age of 9. Young Egyptian kids could start their jobs if they wanted to. So that was basically the rule in ancient Egypt at the time. So, yep, that's the history of ancient Egypt, which is my first episode of ancient Egypt, and I'm planning to cover more topics of history of ancient Egypt in my next videos. And please subscribe and like my video, and I'll see you guys in the next video.